Like so many adults, as well as children, the story of the Wizard of Oz has long had a magical appeal for me, engraved deeply into my heart and into the banks of my memory. Beyond the allure of the beloved characters and fantastical scenes, Dorothy's heartfelt quest seems like a search for something that lies deep within each of our souls. It is as if, as a child, I was walking with Dorothy and her magical friends along the same golden pathway to the sun. As with many of the greatest works of fantasy, myth, poetry, and science fiction, The Wizard of Oz suggests something of the deeper mysteries and mystical truths concerning humanity and the greater universe. The authors of such beloved literary creations as Oz, Alice, and Narnia have to varying degrees made a conscious attempt to communicate greater philosophical or spiritual principles. It is often hard to determine whether such deeper truths were consciously intended or simply the result of the natural creative process and the great artist's ability to penetrate to the deepest core of the human imagination. For according to the tenets of Platonic philosophy and Jungian psychology, such revelatory archetypes and eternal ideas reside at the very core of our being and lie like latent seeds awaiting to blossom from the depths of our creative consciousness. Indeed, such a belief in the power of creative genius to uncover deeper cosmic truths led the visionary poet William Blake to equate the eternal imagination with our divine essence and that redeeming Christ force which lies within us all. In the case of the author Frank Baum, we have reason to believe that he had some awareness of the deeper symbolic significance of his narrative in the wondrous land of Oz. For Baum was known to be a student of various spiritual teachings and esoteric writers. Some have contended that Baum was a Freemason and that some of his symbolism arose from their doctrines. While that claim is questionable, he and his wife were certainly introduced to the teachings of Theosophy nearly 10 years before writing The Wizard of Oz. And while many think of Theosophy in terms of the Buddhist and Hindu spiritual traditions, the teachings of its founder, Helena Blavatsky, were actually suffused with the principles of Western esotericism. Indeed, her first great book, Isis Unveiled, is largely an examination of the Western mystery tradition. The images before you are examples of theosophical metaphysical models, charting those otherworldly entities and hierarchical realms that were believed to lie beyond our smaller earthly world. Beyond the teachings of Theosophy, it is known that Baum was inspired by Hermetic authors such as Paracelsus. Now, I do not believe that Baum was aware of more than a few of the analogies I will draw from his book. Indeed, much if not most of his symbolism I believe to be a product of unconscious archetypal association. Thus, my examination of The Wizard of Oz will come closer to a Jungian or Hermetic analysis and a reflection of my own inner experience with these archetypes and eternal principles. I see represented in the realm of Oz a sort of archetypal alternate universe, suggestive of the astral realms of mystics and magicians. I can't help but notice that the name of Oz bears a sort of inverted kinship with the ancient Greek notion of the Zoa, or eternal life force, that great first and last word of all creation. In the biblical book of Ezekiel, this life force was expressed in the 4 Zoas that transported the chariot of God, known as the Merkabah, into the heavens. The Greek Old Testament word Zoas was translated into English as meaning the 4 animals of the divine chariot: the lion, the eagle, the angel, and the bull. We will later link these Zoas with the 4 main characters in the Oz novels, just as Dorothy's own skyward ascent echoes the mystical journeys of the prophets Elijah and Ezekiel. It is a basic belief of the Hermetic tradition that this smaller earthly world is a reflection of a greater eternal universe, and that all the things in our world are extensions of but a few unchanging principles, and one unifying cosmic order, often referred to as the Logos. These principles of correspondence are borne out in the first scenes of the movie, which are depicted in black and white. Each of the mundane characters on Earth, from the three farmhands, the fortune teller, the mean older woman, to Dorothy, are all transformed in the land of Oz into archetypal characters. For example, Dorothy and her three companions can be equated with the four universal principles found in myth and mysticism, be it expressed as the Tetragrammaton, that fourfold Old Testament name of God, or with the four elements of alchemy, or with the four Zoas of William Blake and the four animals of Ezekiel's chariot. It was interesting to find in the photographic archives two pictures of the three major protagonists, the lion, the tin man, and the scarecrow, first depicted as farmhands, then as the creatures of Oz. The characters are posed in the same postures and positions, and suggest the parallels, one expressed in the realm of the earthly microcosm, and the other in the more luminous, colorful realm of the macrocosm, that is, the mythic land of Oz. As the mystic knows, the higher astral or imaginative realms possess a depth of color and greater dimensionality that may only be hinted at and never fully expressed in words, making our earthly world seem a pale shade of gray in comparison. This contrast is suggested in the movie, when Dorothy passes into that brilliant technicolor world of Oz, which lies far beyond our black and white mundane sphere. We find another Hermetic reference in the figure of the fortune teller, who becomes the great wizard when Dorothy is in the land of Oz. The character of the fortune-telling psychic, who may be seen as a lesser version of the magus or initiatory adept, embodies the magician archetype, which is found in the Tarot. Like the Greek god Hermes, the mage serves as the intermediary who connects the higher and lower worlds. This mediating capacity is borne out in the position of the Tarot magician's arms, which connect the world below with the mystical realms above. As an illuminated medium, the magician wields the power of the Logos or Tetramorph, as symbolized by the four elemental implements before him, those being the fiery wand, the watery cup, the sword of air, and the pentacle of earth. Accordingly, it is the fortune teller or wizard who, like Dorothy, is able to travel between the earth and Oz, which is to say between the upper and lower realms. For this reason, I've associated the magician with the 5 Hebrew letters, and particularly the threefold letter of Shin, which form the name of Yeshua, or the universal solar Christos. We will later find this fivefold force associated with the good witch Glinda, who also has the power to transport herself via her magic sphere from the lower to the upper realms. Dorothy's journey from the lower to the higher worlds reflects a process that is common to mystical experience and incorporates the cosmic principles of polarity and the spiral force. In fact, magical and mystical portals have often been expressed in terms of a spiral force, just as this form is fundamental to many natural creations and human mental processes. The tornado is itself a product of the natural polarities, as it is formed through the meeting of rising warm air and cold air. The traveler Dorothy rises up through the center of the cyclone, as if through the middle harmonizing or androgynous pillar of Kundalini Yoga, or the middle pillar of the Kabbalistic tree of life, are through the central shaft of the caduceus of the archmage Hermes. Indeed, the twisting serpents that wrap around Hermes' caduceus in the lower left are suggestive of a twisting tornado. In the Hindu practice of Raja Yoga, the middle spinal pillar, called Sushumna, provides a channel for the spiritual force to ascend, as it neutralizes those spiraling circuits of solar Pingala and lunar Ida, which wrap around the central pillar. It is through the neutralizing of such a male-female binary that the soul or spiritual force is enabled to ascend. This process is depicted in the illustration on the lower right. My painting in the center illustrates the Kabbalistic tree of life with its 3 vertical pillars. The left pillar represents the involutionary, formative, or female force, and the right-hand pillar the masculine evolutionary path. The central androgynous pillar draws upon and balances the outer poles, or contraries, during the soul's ascent to the higher realms. And in the Kabbalah, it is the gray or lunar sphere of Yesod which the soul must pass through on its way to the heart of the sun. We find in nature, underlying the generation of rose petals or leaves on a stem, a mathematical formula which has been expressed by the Fibonacci series in an equation based upon the square root of 5. Such a fundamental spiral force can be found throughout myth and mystical descriptions, from the experiences of the visionary artist-poet William Blake to that of the biblical prophet Elijah, who went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Blake provides other examples in his painting of Jacob's ascending ladder, and through a description of his own mystical experience as follows. The nature of infinity is this, that everything has its own vortex. And when once a traveler through eternity has passed that vortex, he perceives it roll backward behind this path into a globe itself, enfolding like a sun or a moon, or like a universe of starry majesty. Dorothy encounters a similar spiral force in her own ascent into the realm of Oz. The Wizard of Oz provides us with an allegory of the journey of the soul, revealing those elements in our heart and minds which may lead us to the greater heights of self-realization. The various characters in the story serve as symbols of our own inner mental processes and present models of the polar forces to be found in man and nature. The Wicked Witch represents the lower aspect of the female material principle, like a corrupted Lilith to the originally pure biblical Eve. The Good Witch Glinda represents, like the goddess Isis or Athena, the pure, higher wisdom or illuminating aspect of the feminine principle. We see these polarities depicted in the image on the left, where Dorothy is placed between the 2 witches. Here Dorothy represents the human soul, which must harmoniously navigate between the spiritual and material principles, or the right and the left-hand path, which are embodied in the outer pillars on the Kabbalistic tree of life. It is Dorothy who wears the ruby slippers, which represent the force of pure will and the fire of spirit that allows the soul to rise above all the cares and dualities of the world. Like the winged sandals of Mercury, in conjunction with the magical caduceus, these slippers may transport the traveler to the heights of heaven. But it is only after Dorothy has gone through all the trials of the hero's journey and learned her lessons of the soul that she is able to tap into the magical powers of the ruby slippers. Glinda, the Good Witch, like the Greek wisdom goddess Athena, represents the power of mind, which corresponds to the aerial or solar principle and resides in the central pillar. She is the harmonizing force between the fiery red and the lunar white, which is why she wears a gown of blended pink. In her hand, she holds the wand of the pentagram. The star symbol, with its 5 points, is also threefold in nature, with its top upward triangle, its horizontal second plane, and the third triangle at its base. For it is the star of illumination and its threefold inspiration, which leads us to the greatest heights of mind and spirit. The yellow brick road represents the golden path of the sun that winds through our consciousness and ultimately leads us to the creative source of all. In the classic 1939 Oz movie, its designers drew subconsciously upon these Hermetic archetypes in crafting their yellow brick road. At the beginning of Dorothy's journey, it is the spiral which again drives her forward. But in this case, it is not the destructive force of the cyclone which directs her fate, but rather her own willful intention to make her way through life's challenges, gaining a greater wisdom and understanding along the way. In the roadway, we find the colors of the first 3 primal creative principles. The red corresponds to the first masculine fire principle. The gray or silver refers to the second receptive or lunar female principle. The androgynous yellow or solar path winds its way between the lunar principle and the fiery masculine principle. The maze and the spiral have long served as symbols of the winding course of our life's journey. Ultimately, according to the sacred mysteries, this journey consists of a penetration into the depths of our consciousness. In our spiritual quest to achieve self-understanding, we must navigate the spiraling convolutions of our own human brain, leading to the dark source of all, to our collective unconscious, which holds our most basic instinctual urges, as well as the most profound symbols of transformation. The soul's journey has been mapped out in Jungian psychology, as well as in the myth of Ariadne Theseus and the labyrinth of the Minotaur. Before you are other examples of this inner mapping, as found in 2 labyrinths. The one on the left from the Hindu spiritual tradition, and the other to be found at Chartres Cathedral. Thus does Dorothy, as representing the aspiring human soul, follow the winding path of the sun toward her long-lost spiritual home. The 3 special friends that Dorothy makes in Oz represent 2 things. First, they serve as metaphors for the 3 primal forces of creation, or universal ideas known as the Logos. Secondly, the 3 represent qualities or stages that are essential in the evolution of the human being and the soul's journey towards spiritual perfection. Thus, as Dorothy travels along the yellow brick road, she is in a sense gathering from her friends those very inner qualities that are necessary for human growth. Thus we hear the well-known lines, "If I only had a brain, a heart, the nerve." These 3 can be translated into the need for number 3, greater mind and developed reason, 2, heart or the capacity for empathy, and 1, the nerve, meaning greater will and the determination to enact change for the good. Accordingly, in Oz, the lion aligns with the first primal principle. The Tin Man may be associated with the second primal principle, and the Scarecrow with the third primal principle. The first primal principle is associated with the masculine force, and that of generative energy, will, and the element of fire. In Oz, this force is symbolized by the cowardly lion. It is this willful force or nerve that the lion seeks to find in the kingdom of Oz. In the mystical and esoteric traditions, This first principle is represented by the upward red triangle, or in the Kabbalistic tetragrammaton by the Hebrew letter Yod. Furthermore, in astrology, the sign of Leo, the lion, is the sign of fixed fire. Naturally, the cowardly lion also equates with the lion of Ezekiel's tetramorph. The second primal principle is associated with the feminine nature and with receptivity and fluid matter. It is associated with the emotions and ultimately empathy, thus leading to the Tin Man's wish for a heart. This second primal principle is further represented by the twofold Hebrew letter of He, and with the downward pointing triangle and the element of water. In terms of the astrological fixed signs and the tetramorph, the Tin Man is associated with the eagle of Scorpio. The third primal principle is associated with the androgynous nature and with the qualities of mind and thought. And thus we have the scarecrow's wish to have a brain. The third principle is further associated with the element of air and is represented by the hexagram, whose shape merges the feminine downward triangle with the upward masculine triangle. As it connects the higher fiery principle with the lower feminine principle, it is represented by the Hebrew letter Vav, the third letter of the tetragrammaton. Thus, the scarecrow corresponds to the angelic man of Aquarius and the tetramorph. Of course, the irony of these three friends of Dorothy is that those things each one most desires, courage, a heart, and a brain, are already possessed by the characters to varying degrees. The Tin Man is actually a creature of great heart, the most emotional and empathetic being, often shedding tears to his own personal detriment. And the Scarecrow repeatedly demonstrates the greatest mental acuity of the four characters. For all of these transformative qualities lie within each of us, just as they will arise in us to the degree that they are acknowledged, developed, and embraced. There lies within us a transformative will, the courage to face life's challenges, as well as the force of pure feelings and empathetic response, plus the power of higher mind and reason to lead us through this life and to the eternal life which lies beyond the grave. Dorothy represents the soul, as well as the material body that contains all these qualities. Thus, her character is associated with the square and the Hebrew letter He, both of which are symbols of the material or physical principle. Ultimately, it is the greater soul that guides our bodily being through its trials of experience. The first companion Dorothy meets is the Scarecrow. It is interesting to note, in the context of the alchemical mysteries, that the crow or raven, as found flying around the Scarecrow, is associated with the first stage of nigredo, the blackening, in the alchemical process of personal transformation. This dark stage is marked by the trials of material existence and a deficiency of understanding and mental power. When the Scarecrow is first asked what direction Dorothy must take, he is uncertain. But shortly thereafter, though supposedly having no brain, the Scarecrow is smart enough to trick the treemen into throwing their apples at them so that he and Dorothy may eat. Throughout their adventures, the Scarecrow demonstrates the most intelligence of all the travelers, just as the supposedly heartless Tin Man is the most sympathetic and emotional. This simply goes to show that outward labels do not determine one's real worth or the true inner qualities of any woman or man. The images before you are indicative of the journey the soul must follow. Balance between the forces of fire and spirit, symbolized by the red triangle, and those of the earth and matter, the green square. This is the central path of the sun, equivalent to that androgynous pillar on the tree of life, which leads to spiritual completion. This threefold path, or wedding of the opposites, is the key to the sacred mysteries, whereby the aspirant may attain mystical completion and return to one's lost spiritual home. The Tin Man, who represents the watery, liquid, or emotional elements, is throughout the story affected by oil and water. He vacillates between two states, either frozen by rain and snow, or released via the loosening power of oil. Such fluctuation is the way of the emotional nature of woman and man, if it is not moderated by balance and reason. Such an oscillation between the two states also reminds one of that crucial formula in alchemy of solve et coagula, or dissolution and coagulation, and the endless cycles of change that occur in man and society. As the limits of old rigid ideas dissolve, then recoagulate into a new model of growth. Finally, Dorothy meets the cowardly lion in the heart of the forest. The forest represents that dark night of the soul, where doubt and tribulation will test the resolution of every woman and man. It is this very doubt that early on plagues the lion and his strength of self-belief. But deep within this lion of the sun resides a courage and resolution which eventually comes to the fore. Dorothy, as representing the spiritual aspirant, is on the road to self-realization, having identified those key elements needed in her evolutionary journey, those being 1, a lioness will, 2, a pure heart's love and empathy, 3, a thinker's mind and higher reason. Yet, even after recognizing these necessary qualities, there are continuing trials that must be faced. Doubt and failure may still arise in the spiritual quest. Then there are those obstacles that are found in the lower instinctual impulses and addictive behaviors of the reptilian brain, dark seeds which are buried deep in our subconscious. So deeply are they embedded that one can ever fall prey to the sleep-filled traps of darkness. Such a dark roadblock is signified by the poppy field that is conjured up by the wicked witch. The lion and Dorothy succumbed to this sleep of darkness. However, the higher mind and pure heart, signified by the scarecrow and the Tin Man, do not fall prey to the witch's spell and continue to fight against the darkness. It is for the good witch Glinda to lead the travelers beyond the wicked witch's spell of darkness. In respect to this witchy dyad, Glinda may be understood to be the spirit of illumination, and can thus be linked to the principle of the Christ force. The snowflakes represent those deep, harmonious geometrical patterns that underlie and give strength to all creation. We will find similar qualities in the crystalline Emerald City of Oz. The Emerald City may be archetypally linked to the crystalline mountain home of the Hindu gods Shiva and Shakti, or the celestial city as found in St. John's biblical revelation. Like the divine city of Jerusalem in Revelation, the Emerald City is made of glittering crystal. It is interesting to reflect upon John's description of the celestial city in relation to the Emerald City of Oz. In the Bible, it is stated that The wall of Jerusalem was of jasper, and the foundations of the wall were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second of sapphire, the third of chalcedony, the fourth of an emerald. And the one sitting on the godly throne was as brilliant as gemstones, like jasper and carnelian. And the glow of an emerald circled his throne like a rainbow. When thinking of the Emerald City, my mind inevitably turns to that ancient 3rd century document, the Emerald Tablet. In that quintessential Hermetic text, we find a description of the mystical process of alchemical transmutation, where the material body is transformed from leaden matter into divine mind and spiritual light. This process is expressed in the following words. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth and receives the force of things superior and inferior. It is such a worldly descent and celestial reascent, which is ultimately accomplished by the soulful Dorothy and the magical Wizard of Oz. After meeting the Wizard of Oz in the Emerald City, Dorothy and her friends return to the yellow brick road and the dark forest. It is here that Dorothy is carried off by the flying monkeys and taken to the Wicked Witch in her castle. The monkeys represent that instinctual part of one's mentality, which may rise from the depths of the subconscious and subvert one's spiritual progress, even after having received illuminating experiences. Such a dialectical struggle is suggested in the myth of Hercules fighting the monstrous Hydra, wherein each of the heads, which grow back after being cut off, represent the persistent power of such deep subconscious urges. Though held captive by the Wicked Witch, Dorothy's loyal companions enter the castle in an attempt to rescue her. The witch meets her death through the power of water, which is to say, the higher feminine principle of love and empathy. The witch first tries to wield the destructive force of fire, aimed at the scarecrow, who is the symbol of higher mind. However, it is water that neutralizes such destructive force, delivered by the soul principle of Dorothy, and melts the witch down into a watery pool, returning her to that higher feminine principle which has for so long been lost to her, and from which she was born. Dorothy returns to Oz with her prize, holding the witch's flying broomstick in hand. It is upon Dorothy's final meeting with the great Wizard of Oz that the truth of this supposed demigod is revealed. For this blustering being is revealed to be but a mask placed over a rather small and simple man, who, like many patriarchal figures, has hidden behind an institutional or authoritarian veil. Indeed, these two faces of the wizard reflect those dual aspects of the archetypal masculine principle. The first great and powerful Oz represents those qualities to be found in the Old Testament figure of Jehovah, which is to say, the alpha male archetype. This paternal divinity is full of bluster, threats, vindictiveness, and egotistical control, mixed with a small dash of forgiving mercy. The loyal dog Toto pulls back the curtain on this patriarchal facade as the truth is revealed to Dorothy and her friends. Thus, in the figure of the Wizard of Oz, the authoritarian Old Testament covenant yields to the mild and merciful newer covenant. This more compassionate, Christ-like omega male comes closer to Plato's divine creator, as found in his Timaeus dialogue, who the philosopher simply called the good. Despite the revelations concerning the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy still believes that she needs such a patriarchal force to complete her soul's journey and return to her true home. But the wizard flies away in his hot air balloon, leaving a disappointed Dorothy behind. Yet Dorothy's constant protectress, that divine feminine force of Glinda, returns in her flying sphere in order to show Dorothy, via the single eye of spiritual light, the true way home. Glinda finds that Dorothy is distraught, believing that her only means of returning home has disappeared into the clouds. However, Glinda points down to the ruby slippers with her starry wand and lets Dorothy know that she needs nothing outside of herself to return home. For within her lies all the power of transformation and celestial flight. All possibilities lie within her own divine will, symbolized by the ruby slippers, and within her sacred imagination. By simply visualizing her desired destination, her long-lost eternal home, she is able to project herself through time and space and return to her ultimate source. With this inner knowledge gained, Dorothy can traverse the rainbow bridge of the Greek goddess Iris and return to her solar beginnings. For it is this vast cosmic realm which we all unconsciously aspire to and return to after our death. This mystical homeland is so vast and ineffable that no words can adequately describe it, leaving one but to lovingly say, "There is no place like home. There is no place like home."